Okay, I want you to imagine something for a second. You're a TV news anchor. The lights are blinding, the camera is live, and literally millions of people are watching you. But the words on the teleprompter, they're not making sense. This isn't some nightmare. For a lot of professionals, this is a real, high-stakes part of their day. Today, we're going to get into the workplace experiences of adults with dyslexia. And what you're about to see is that there is a whole other side to the story that almost nobody talks about. Wow. I mean, just listen to that. This comes from Dr. Anna Maria Jones, and her research is really the heart of what we're talking about today. You can just feel the weight of that experience, the shame, the humiliation, that feeling of being completely misunderstood in a job where you're supposed to be perfect. And sadly, it's a story that's way, way too common. But if that was the whole story, this would be a really depressing explainer. The amazing thing this research shows us is a totally different narrative. One about resilience, about some really unique strengths, and ultimately, about a hidden advantage. So to get to that hidden advantage, we have to start on the same page. It's time to kind of throw out the old, outdated ideas and really get a handle on what dyslexia actually is, and just as important, what it isn't. This right here is probably the most important thing to get. Dyslexia is a neurological difference. It is not a deficit. It's just about how the brain is wired. And this is critical. It has absolutely nothing to do with how smart a person is. That's probably one of the most persistent and damaging myths out there. And you can see this huge shift in how we think about it. The old medical model basically said the person is the problem. They need to be fixed. But the social model, which is really the core of the whole neurodiversity movement, it completely flips the script. It says, hey, wait a minute. The problem isn't the person's brain. It's the rigid, inflexible environment that's creating all the barriers. So the focus moves from fixing the person to fixing the workplace. Okay, so with that new way of thinking in mind, what do these barriers in the environment actually look like for someone with dyslexia, day to day? The research kept pointing to these same things over and over. Just think about our modern email culture, right? It's a nonstop flood of text that you have to read, understand, and then reply to perfectly, usually under a tight deadline. Or picture yourself in a super dense, boring training session, trying to soak up a ton of new information all at once. For some people, these aren't just small annoyances, they're a source of genuine daily anxiety. And here it is, straight from one of the professionals in the study. This isn't some theory. It's that real gut-wrenching feeling of clicking send on a big, important email and just praying you didn't miss a mistake that your brain just doesn't see. Okay, so we've seen the hurdles, but remember, that is not the whole story. Now we get to the really exciting part of this research, where we pivot from the challenges to the unique and, honestly, powerful advantages of the dyslexic mind. Now check this out. This visualizes the other side of the coin. The people in the study didn't just talk about their struggles, they were actually very aware of their strengths. And we're not talking about little perks here. These are major high-value skills that companies today are desperate to find. And here's where we connect the dots. These strengths aren't random. They actually seem to be a direct result of having to navigate the world with a differently wired brain. For example, because just reading a line of text can be tough, the dyslexic brain often gets incredible at seeing the big picture, at connecting ideas and seeing patterns that nobody else does. This leads to amazing problem-solving and thinking way outside the box. It's not a bug, it's a feature, and it leads to skills that are super in demand. So, the big question is, how do successful professionals manage all this? How do they handle the daily hurdles while also leaning into these incredible strengths? Well, they build their own personal toolkit. What the study found is that successful people didn't just sit around and wait for help. They became experts at something called self-accommodation. And they followed this really simple but powerful process. First, pinpoint the exact problem. Second, find a tool or a strategy that works for you. And third, build a system around it so it just becomes second nature. It's all about taking control. And the toolkits they build are so practical. I mean, we're talking about everything from using software like Grammarly to help with writing, to working with a coach, to something as simple as turning a boring wall of text into a visual chart. And it's also about knowing what you're good at and what you're not, so you can team up with coworkers who fill in those gaps. That's not a weakness, that's just being smart about collaboration. And here's a perfect example from one of the participants. See how they talk about visual things, charts, bolding, italics. This person figured out that their brain handles visual info way better, so they built a whole system to support that. It's just a brilliant, personalized solution. Now, self-accommodation is awesome, but it puts all the work on the individual. So the final and maybe most important piece of the puzzle is changing the environment itself. How do we build workplaces that actually unlock these talents from day one? This table is pretty much a cheat sheet for any manager or team leader. Instead of this one-size-fits-all approach, it's about offering options. A long report doesn't have to be written. Maybe a verbal presentation works just as well. Those dense training manuals, supplement them with video tutorials. And the funny thing is, these kinds of changes don't just help neurodivergent employees. They usually end up benefiting everybody on the team. And that really brings us to the final big question. The research is crystal clear. Dyslexia brings both challenges and incredible advantages to the table. So the real question for all of us is this. Are we designing our work environments to weed out anyone who thinks differently, or are we building them to find, support, and harness the amazing power of a truly diverse mind? The answer to that is really going to define the future of work.